Memorial Day 2023. My name is Peter Brooks, and I hope that these words bring comfort and some healing to all those people who can hear my voice. A reading of Senate Joint Resolution 14, the 111th Congress, First Session. To acknowledge a long history of official depredations and ill-conceived policies by the federal government regarding Indian tribes, and offer an apology to all Native peoples on behalf of the United States. In the Senate of the United States, April 30th, 2009, Mr. Brownback for himself, Mr. Inouye, Mr. Baucus, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Crapo, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Lieberman, and Mr. Tester introduced the following joint resolution, which was read twice and referred to the Committee on Indian Affairs. Joint resolution to acknowledge a long history of official depredations and ill-conceived policies by the federal government regarding Indian tribes, and offer an apology to all Native peoples on behalf of the United States. Whereas the ancestors of today's Native peoples inhabited the island, the land of the United States present day, since time immemorial. And for thousands of years before the arrival of people of European descent. Whereas for millennia, Native peoples have honored, protected, and stewarded this land that we treasure, we cherish. Whereas Native peoples are spiritual people with a deep and abiding belief in the Creator. And for millennia, Native peoples have maintained a powerful spiritual connection to this land, as evidenced by their customs and legends. Whereas the arrival of Europeans in North America opened a new chapter in the history of Native peoples. Whereas the establishment of permanent European settlements in North America did stir conflict with nearby Indian tribes, peaceful and mutually beneficial interactions also took place. Whereas the foundational English settlements in Jamestown, Virginia, and Plymouth, Massachusetts owed their survival in large measure to the compassion and aid of Native peoples in the vicinities of these settlements. Whereas in the infancy of the United States, the founders of the Republic expressed their desire for a just relationship with the Indian tribes, as evidenced by the Northwest Ordinance enacted by Congress in 1787, which begins with the phrase, quote, "the utmost good faith shall always be observed toward the Indians. Whereas Indian tribes provided great assistance to the fledgling republic as it strengthened and grew, including invaluable help to Meriwether Lewis and William Clark on their epic journey from St. Louis, Missouri to the Pacific coast. Whereas native peoples and non-native settlers engaged in numerous armed conflicts in which, unfortunately, both took innocent lives, including those of women and children. Whereas the federal government violated many of the treaties ratified by Congress and other diplomatic agreements with Indian tribes. Whereas the United States forced Indian tribes and their citizens to move away from their traditional homelands and on to federally established and controlled reservations in accordance with such acts as the Act of May 28, 1830, commonly known as the Indian Removal Act. Whereas many native people suffered and perished. One, during the execution of the official federal government policy of forced removal, including the infamous Trail of Tears and Long Walk. Two, during bloody armed confrontations and massacres, such as the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864 and the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890, and three, on numerous Indian reservations. Whereas the federal government condemned the traditions, beliefs, and customs of native peoples and endeavored to assimilate them by such policies as the Redistribution of Land Act of February 8th, 1887, commonly known as the General Allotment Act, and the forcible removal of native children from their families to faraway boarding schools where their native practices and languages were degraded and forbidden. Whereas officials of the federal government and private United States citizens harmed native peoples by the unlawful acquisition of recognized tribal land and the theft of tribal resources and assets from recognized tribal land. Whereas the policies of the federal government toward Indian tribes and the breaking of covenants with Indian tribes have contributed to the severe social ills and economic troubles in many native communities today. Whereas, despite the wrongs committed against Native peoples by the United States, Native peoples have remained committed to the protection of this great land, as evidenced by the fact that on a per capita basis, more Native peoples have served in the United States Armed Forces and placed themselves in harm's way in defense of the United States in every major military conflict than any other ethnic group. Whereas Indian tribes have actively influenced the public life of the United States by continued cooperation with Congress and the Department of the Interior through the involvement of Native individuals in official federal government positions and by leadership of their own sovereign tribes. Whereas Indian tribes are resilient and determined to preserve, develop, and transmit to future generations their unique cultural identities. Whereas the National Museum of the American Indian was established within the Smithsonian Institution as a living memorial to Native peoples and their traditions. And whereas Native peoples are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled. Section 1, Resolution of Apology to Native Peoples of the United States. A. Acknowledgement and apology. The United States, acting through Congress, 1. Recognizes the special legal and political relationship that Indian tribes have with the United States and the solemn covenant with the land that we share. 2. Commends and honors Native peoples for the thousands of years that they have stewarded and protected this land. 3. Recognizes that there have been years of official depredations, ill-conceived policies, and the breaking of covenants by the federal government regarding Indian tribes. 4. Apologizes on behalf of the people of the United States to all Native peoples for the many instances of violence, maltreatment, and neglect inflicted on Native peoples by citizens of the United States. 5. Expresses its regret for the ramifications of former wrongs and its commitment to build on the positive relationships of the past and present to move toward a brighter future where all people of this land live reconciled as brothers and sisters and harmoniously steward and protect this land together. 6. Urges the president to acknowledge the wrongs of the United States against Indian tribes in the history of the United States in order to bring healing to this land. And 7. Commends the state governments that have begun reconciliation efforts with recognized Indian tribes located in their boundaries and encourages all state governments similarly to work toward reconciling relationships with Indian tribes within their boundaries. B. Disclaimer. Nothing in this joint resolution authorizes or supports any claim against the United States or 2. serves as a settlement of any claim against the United States. Senate Joint Resolution 14. Happy Memorial Day.